Some of you have wondered if now CIA Director John Ratcliffe is releasing all this intelligence about how Obama and his army just whole cloth pushed a hoax to take down Trump, and we knew about it for years. Why didn't Ratcliffe release any of these details back when he was Trump's Director of National Intelligence in the first term? Well, there is a very clear answer. It leads back to the CIA. 7 years ago, in 2018, Kash Patel and then Chairman Devin Nunez released the single most important document in unraveling the entire Democrat Russiagate hoax, the Nunez memo. Remember that? 330 pages long, some 65 depositions, and 2 years in the making. The conclusion from the Nunez memo was crystal clear. Russiagate was a hoax. To the public, it was this complicated story about mixed intelligence, unclear sourcing, potential Russian propaganda, and back then, Democrats maintained this sort of plausible ambiguity. They were able to blur the lines for the confused public between what was real and what was clearly fake, and what they knew about these distinctions. Turns out, Kash and Nunez knew. The reality was a much darker one only the deepest swamp could execute. Obama, his team, Susan Rice, John Brennan, James Clapper, James Comey, all knew the Trump is a Russian asset story was absolutely fake. They pushed the investigation through. It was a purely political hit job, using government resources to take down a political opponent. Kash and Nunez's evidence, well, they had it. Unbeknownst to the general public at that time, Kash and his team put together a 17-page classified report. They tried to get it out during Nunez's memo days, and then later, when John Ratcliffe was picked to serve as Trump's first-term Director of National Intelligence, Kash Patel became Trump's deputy DNI, remember? And together, Ratcliffe and Patel were intent on using their positions to expose the cabal. They wanted to publish this 17-page classified report showing there was corruption from the very top inside the intelligence that fueled the Russiagate hoax. But somehow, they were not able to. Why? Well, because the report had to be handed over to the CIA, and the CIA proceeded to lock it up. Trump's then CIA Director, Gina Haspel, did not allow that report to see the light of day. She seemed to be playing cover for her predecessor, Obama CIA Director John Brennan. Kash laid all this out over a year ago in an interview, and even then, he was still not allowed to completely reveal what it was he saw. But he made it clear in public, and even to me personally, there was a reason none of this came out during Trump's first term, and it all leads back to one person.
Russiagate, as we all know, was a politically funded operation into our intelligence and law enforcement communities to go to a secret court and lie about a political opponent to illegally surveil him. I mean, that took us 2 years to unpack, right? It was a big deal. But then you got to ask, wait a second, how did that happen? And who are the players behind it? And I've always said Gina Haspel is one of the leading Russiagate architects who's remained behind the scenes. She would go on to become Trump's director of the Central Intelligence Agency. But if you rewind the clock back, and this is something I've told Schellenberg and Taibbi about and many others, in 2016, when Russiagate was launched in England, Gina Haspel was the CIA station chief for England, the #1 intel officer in the United Kingdom.
Haspel was station chief in London at a critical time in the creation of the Russiagate hoax. And this, it turns out, is a very important detail, a piece of the puzzle no one is talking about as this month. The Trump administration sets to work dismantling the real culprits behind Russiagate. And now that Kash is at FBI and Ratcliffe is at CIA, things could get extremely interesting for former CIA Director Gina Haspel. I bring in now a special guest, someone who is probably one of just a handful of people you should ever trust on putting this all in context. Multiple New York Times best-selling author and head of the Government Accountability Institute, the great Peter Schweizer, also host of a fantastic podcast called The Drill Down. Peter, thank you for joining us. Let's go right in. Pick up from here. where this story goes. Why is the fact that Gina Haspel was CIA station chief in London so important in the context of Russiagate?
Yeah, well, you have to understand a little bit of the history for Gina Haspel. She had been London station chief for the CIA in the 2000s. She then came back to CIA headquarters, and then John Brennan handpicked her in 2014 to go back to London as the station chief there. What's important to understand is this is highly, highly unusual in the context of the CIA. It's not very often that a person is the station chief at the same posting twice in their career. But it was John Brennan that picked Haspel to go to London for that position. And if you look at the cluster of things that happened in the build-up to, and then the effort to unseat Donald Trump through Russia collusion, so many of those passageways go through London. Of course, this is the Steele dossier. Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer located in London. You had, the interesting involvement of Dearlove, the head of British intelligence, who we know played a role in this. You had the Cambridge academic who was trying to recruit FBI agents. So a lot of the roads lead through London. And I think what needs to be done is there needs to be a looking at the communications that was taking place between John Brennan and her when she was the CIA station chief. She then came back to Washington, became the deputy director of the CIA, appointed by John Brennan, just as Donald Trump was being inaugurated President of the United States, and then Donald Trump appointed her head of the CIA in 2018, which put her in a position where she could, in fact, smother this story and kill this story, and she played a very important role. So she needs to be investigated. There needs to be a full disclosure so people can understand the role that she played in all of this.
Why do you think she seems to be skating through this entire story unscathed so far? I mean, with the exception of yourself, with the exception of those who remember Kash Patel's early interviews, no one's really talking about Gina Haspel in this context right now.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can only speculate here. I think one of the things that people are confusing is they think because she was a Trump appointee, that she was somebody that Trump trusted and was in her inner circle. And that was certainly not the case. She is somebody who spent her career at the CIA. She worked in covert operations. And I think she's somebody whose allegiance was closer to the bureaucracy of the CIA than it was actually to the elected president that she was supposed to be serving. So people kind of confuse that and assume that she somehow is somebody that was trying to help Trump. That was not the case. I think the second thing is that she has avoided, public attention. She's not like John Brennan, who goes on MSNBC and on these liberal podcasts and tries to plead his case. She, left the CIA.
Right.
She joined defense contractors on the board of directors. She's tried to lay low. I think we need to go where the facts lead. And she was square one in the origins of this. And she was also a key component in covering this up in 2020. There were a handful of U.S. senators, you probably remember this, Chanel, in the fall of 2020, before the election, that were asking for her to release the relevant documents, the ones that we now finally see in 2025, and she flat out refused to do so. And I think we now probably can surmise why that might be.
Well, we learned later on that, Kash and Nunez and Ratcliffe, they knew what was being suppressed, but they were in this very frustrating position where they couldn't, she was technically a superior to them, and as far as the intelligence world goes, they couldn't, embarrass her or pressure her, and I'm sure she was telling them things behind the scenes to kind of delay, but ultimately we know the pressure was on behind the scenes by the players who are now in power.
Yeah, and I mean, this is an example of the abuse of the classification system. Look, we all understand there are secrets that we have that need to be protected, foreign sources, foreign activities, information that we have. In this case, they literally use the classification process not to protect any of those foreign sources. They used it to protect themselves, to cover up what they were doing, the manipulation that was taking place. And that is something that I think is just unconscionable. But also we need to look at reforms as to why they were able to do so. I think we give too much authority and power to the bureaucrats on the side of these intelligence agencies to determine what can be declassified and not. And they use it time and time again to really cover their rear ends rather than protect the legitimate sources.
Exactly. And I think that you raised such an excellent detail that is so quickly forgotten, just the relationship between Gina Haspel and John Brennan. I mean, she was technically, she went back, she was pulled out of the service and put back into London, an extraordinarily rare move by John Brennan himself. I mean, there were some, no doubt, career allegiances that were formed, if not just outright friendships that were being protected. So excellent points. As always, Peter, stay on it. Thank you very much for making the time, joining us on Fine Point.
Thanks for having me, Chanel.